you would like me to hold up, I can.
Somewhere you can't have it back. That's
I think there was something going on.
I was just going to leave for you. Okay. Guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. Want some more? I'd love one seat. Okay, folks, we are at noon. We are having some technical difficulties. Jennifer's working on that, so just have some patience with us. We are working on that today. So with that, everybody, thank you for being here. Man, it's already almost the end of August. August 22nd, 2023, City of Cheyenne Public Services Committee. Thank you all for being here. I think you all know the rules as well, except for Mr. Lloyd. He's not a rule follower, but everybody else. I just wanted to point out. I love picking on him. I just want to point out to everybody, just real quick, if you are online, please, if you don't mind, mute yourselves. Use the raise hand function if you would, so we know that you want to speak. Mute yourselves if you're not speaking. Again, just out of respect for everybody else. If you do have a device or a phone or anything like that here in the room, please mute it or turn it off while you're here in the room, again, out of respect. Any public comment here in this committee should be related to one of the items on the agenda. If you happen to have comment that you wish to make that is not related to an item on today's agenda, you are certainly able to do that next Monday night at the City Council meeting, but it will not be entertained today. And then last thing, if anyone wishes to speak, go ahead and go up to the podium and activate the microphone. If you're not aware of how to do that, there are enough people here in the room that can direct you. And then when you speak, please identify who you are in case we need to follow up with you. With that, Madam Clerk, first item, please.
Sorry.
And I can read it.
Number 8, ordinance third reading, creating section 2.08.060, city employees and immediate family members, conflict of interest policy of chapter 2.08, city officers and employees generally, of Title II, Administration of Personnel of the Municipal Code of the City of Cheyenne, Wyoming, requiring the promulgation of a conflict of interest policy for employees of the City of Cheyenne as specified, and making a conforming amendment to section 2.52.010 regulations and benefits.
Thank you. Do we happen to have a staff report, Madam Attorney? I'm assuming that'll come from you.
Mr. Chairman, through you to members of the Public Services Committee, Stephanie Boster, Cheyenne City Attorney. Very briefly, this is a conflict of interest ordinance that was born after the original ordinance went through the City Council. It's a much simplified version of the conflict of interest policy that complies with Wyoming Statute 15.1.127, subsection C. And I believe Dr. Rennie is the sponsor, but I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Madam Attorney. Any questions from the committee for Attorney Boster? Go ahead, Mr. Claiborne.
Thank you. Ms. Boster, when it comes to the definition of immediate family, what do you consider to be the immediate family?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Councilman Laybourne, I don't see that defined in the ordinance. I do think we have it defined in our rules and regulations, but just off the cuff, I would say a spouse and children.
Well, that's what I would consider to be immediate family. I had a really interesting situation here recently where we were looking at a parks and cultural resources master plan, and it was brought to my attention that my cousin's wife was one of the people who was the outfit she worked for was one of the proposers, and it was suggested by the purchasing office that was a conflict. Do you see that as a conflict?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Councilman Laybourne, I think the question is whether or not you're benefiting from the transaction, and my assumption would be that you're not. It's a cousin and you weren't aware.
Well, as a result, I didn't participate, and on the advice of the purchasing office, and so that obviously there's absolutely no benefit. I have a very limited family, and so I'd like some clarification on that, and maybe I can get it from the purchasing office, but it was really strange to me that that would be considered a conflict of interest, because I don't have anything to do with my cousin's wife and her business, and could not possibly ever have any benefit from that. So that is something that needs some clarification. And so also what comes up a lot is my brother's electrical contracting business that from time to time he does city work. So as I read this, and your interpretation of immediate family would be that he isn't a member of my immediate family, and I have absolutely no financial interest in his business, never have, never will. So I don't believe that's a conflict of interest. Do you?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Councilman Laybourne, I don't believe it's a direct conflict of interest. There's what is truly a conflict and the perception of a conflict. And I think you often want to guard against that, but strictly speaking, it would not be a conflict of interest for either your brother or your cousin.
Thank you.
Further questions from other members of the committee for Attorney Bosner? Seeing and hearing none. Thank you. Public comment. Here's that guy I was referred to. Mr. Lloyd, go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Seth Lloyd. I'm with I'm an employee of the city of Cheyenne. I guess I should just say that. I also participate in what is called an employee advocacy group made up of the remnants of the City of Cheyenne City Employees Association Board. So this employee advocacy group discussed this ordinance and generally was acceptable to it. But just like myself, they were curious as to why it seems like everything else in the ordinance is just kind of a reference the employee handbook, reference the employee handbook, reference the handbook for specifics anyway. We have this issue, reference the employee handbook for specifics. But when it comes to the gift amount, that's set in stone in the ordinance. It is in the employee handbook, so I don't know why we're not just keeping the path the same. And that way we don't have to come back with a new ordinance every time inflation makes that kind of a out of date. It can just go with the employee handbook, whatever the employee handbook is. I don't recall a substitute being brought forward or anything like that, changing the ordinance from the original. So I believe this is still an issue with the ordinance as it's written. Just kind of curious as to why we feel it's important to actually put that solidly in the ordinance with everything else is just kind of a reference to the employee handbook. That is everything I have to say. If anyone has questions for me, I'm willing, but that's it. Thank you.
I'm not going to solicit questions from the committee. Rather, Mr. Lloyd, I believe we have Mr. Brody online who can potentially answer that question. So I'm going to try to get an answer for your question, if that's all right. Mr. Brody.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly clear. Did you hear the question, and would you like to respond?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The reason or the way that paragraph 3 is drafted is for that very reason of inflationary aspects or other causes that the gift threshold would have to be redefined. All paragraph 3 does is give HR in consultation with the city attorney's office the ability to increase that monetary threshold for what constitutes a gift if necessary, and if it's determined that the current $25 gift threshold or gift limitation is no longer appropriate. So what this does is actually avoid the need for city council to revisit that issue if, for example, the gift restriction should be limited to $30 or $35. This merely puts in the ceiling over which HR in consultation with the city attorney's office could set that gift restriction. So it's $50 or less. It's currently set at $25, and the current policy can remain as it is if that's the determination of HR in consultation with the city attorney's office. I hope that answers some questions or any confusion around that paragraph.
Stand by, Mr. Brody. I'll give you the opportunity to follow up, Mr. Lloyd, if you'd like.
Mr. Chairman, Committee, I do understand the way it's drafted, that it's a not more than 50 and that the current policy is well under that $50 threshold. If it makes the council more comfortable to put it in an ordinance to have a not to exceed $50, I suppose that's acceptable, but I just find it interesting that we have that in there when nothing else has kind of a hard and fast rule to it. So that's just the thought process there. If it stays at 25 in the handbook, it stays at 25 in the handbook, that's fine. I understand that this ordinance doesn't move it up to 50, but the question is, what do we do 50 years from now, or whatever it is? Are we amending the ordinance again? It just feels a little weird to me to have that solidly in the ordinance and everything else is kind of directs to the employee handbook. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Duly noted, just consistency. Further public comment. Further public comment from in the room here. Seeing and hearing none. Madam Clerk, do we have any raised hands?
No raised hands.
At this time, public comment is closed. The chair would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve.
Second. Moved by Dr. Rennie, seconded by Mr. Seagrave. Questions, comments from the committee related to this ordinance on third reading? Dr. Rennie, I see your light is on. Did you have further comment? Okay. Seeing and hearing no further comment from the committee, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? The recommendation for this ordinance on third reading will be for approval at next Monday's city council meeting. Next item, please.
Number 9, ordinance third reading, creating a new section 15.50.070 neglected structure at chapter 15.50 historic design guideline of title 15 buildings and construction of the municipal code of the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Go ahead.
Chairman, through you to the Commission, Lonnie Olson, Planning and Development Department. So before you is a demolition by neglect ordinance that seeks to have owners of historic properties maintain their properties and not allow them to fall into disrepair. The requirements of the ordinance only apply to structures that have a contributing status. And that means a building, structure, site, future object found in a local or a national historic district that contributes to the historic character of the district. The Cheyenne Historic Preservation Board has been working on this for quite a few years. I have not been with them for the whole time, but we do have 2 members from the board here that are here to ask or answer questions that you guys might have, and staff to answer questions.
Thank you. Unless the committee has an issue, thank you, Mr. Olson. Unless the committee has an issue, I think I will go ahead and call the folks from the Historic Preservation Board up. They are technically part of drafting this. Would the committee feel that that's appropriate? Yeah. Mr. Simpson, if you'd like to, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Elmer Simpson, I'm the current chair of the Cheyenne Historic Preservation Board. First thing I'd like to do, I'd be very remiss if I didn't sincerely apologize that at your first meeting, representatives of this board were not present. That is not what we had intended to happen, and it's put you in a difficult situation. And I sincerely apologize for that we were not able to attend in person, and really appreciate that we have an opportunity here today to answer any questions regarding the intent or the effect of this ordinance. I understand, Mr. Chairman, there were some concerns about the capacity of the board, perhaps, to fulfill this ordinance, some concerns about whether this ordinance compels expenditures of funds on the part of the city, and certainly happy to make an attempt to respond to any other questions or concerns.
You have, Mr. Simpson, you are aware of some of those questions. If you have answers prepared for those ones you've been made aware of, I mean, I feel free to do that, and I'm sure these gentlemen will ask additional questions.
Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So regarding the capacity of the board, a couple of things that I would mention is that to a person, the members of this board are in support of this ordinance and feel that the board does have the capacity to administer it. I think certainly we would hope that there would not be instances of these petitions coming forward. But if there are, the board does feel that it has the administrative capacity to handle it. Part of that is that this particular board and its guiding rules and its establishing ordinance requires that members of this historic preservation board have some expertise in architecture, some expertise in historic preservation. So there are qualifications for folks to be appointed to this board that we think helps ensure the capacity of the board to handle situations that have to do with historic structures and their duties in this way. There are some other things that the board is mandated to do that I feel are, germane to historic preservation, but that involve a lot more administrative work, like making nominations to the National Register, doing the surveys, historical surveys that we are compelled to do. For the folks on this board that by and large have this expertise, it's very, very painstaking, very detailed work. And I think that's hopefully another demonstration that the people who choose to put themselves forward to be nominated to this board do have the requisite expertise and have experience with historic preservation, know how detailed it can be, and have the capacity, should this ordinance need to be applied to do its administrative duties. And I think the fact that the ordinance does have a lot of direct involvement and authority from the professional staff is also another important consideration. So that's how I would hopefully answer the question of the capacity of the board. I'm pretty sure that we wouldn't have brought this forward if we didn't, to a person on this board, feel that we have the ability to do it. We've been working on it for a long time, and ample time to consider whether or not this was going to be difficult for the board to do its portion of the duties. If there are questions on that particular topic, I'd be happy to answer them. And that's how I would begin to address that particular concern, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Go ahead and proceed.
Okay. A big question on the expenditure of funds. I think it's very important to point out that in this ordinance, there is nothing in this draft ordinance that mandates the expenditure of public funds on behalf of the city. It does provide an opportunity for the city, if it chooses to and has the means to do so, to, for instance, repair a structure that's been found to be, a structure that's under this ordinance. But it by no means in any language compels the city to expend those funds. Another part of it is there's a very unique part of this ordinance that you find in ordinances of this type. And it's trying to give some opportunity for a property owner to make the claim that the reason that the structure has fallen into disrepair is because of economic hardship. So it's an attempt to show some sensitivity and opportunity for good faith on the part of the board to hear from that property owner, let them come forward and explain why it is that they have let this building fall into disrepair because of economic hardship. And it provides an opportunity for this board and that property owner to create a plan. And the plan would be one that would help hopefully mitigate their economic hardship. But nothing in the plan compels the expenditure of any funds. It does provide, if there are opportunity to educate the property owner on things like the historic preservation tax credit, federal means or nonprofit organizations they could go to. If at any given point in time, this board happens to have a slush fund, and we've talked about that a little bit, it would probably always only have a modest amount, but maybe at some point we would have, as part of the plan, we could say you can access, you know, a fund to be determined. But it's a plan. The plan provisions would only include that which is already possible or provided for. And again, that plan does not bind the city or compel it to expend its own funds in any way. But it does provide an opportunity for this. Let's see if there's anything that's available that we can do to help. So that's another thing I would mention about this ordinance in terms of concerns about property rights and things of that nature. Obviously, that's a very serious concern and something that we've thought a lot about. What we're trying to do here is represent all of the citizens who may have adjacent homes that are losing their property value when this unfortunate circumstance is allowed to happen. Again, it only applies to contributing structures in established historic districts. And hopefully, compared to the expense of the situation where the city has to spend money to demolish or move buildings, establishing an ordinance like this down the road, taking a long view, could help prevent the expenditure of a lot of public funds, as opposed to mandating that any be expended.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee for Mr. Simpson?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Seagrave?
I have several, please.
Go ahead.
Mr. Simpson, in 15.50.070 Purpose General Authority, talk about contributing structures. Can you tell us how many contributing structures there are in the historic districts? Or is there 5? Is there 50?
My apologies, Kathy Tickle with the Historic Preservation Board. Last calculation, we had a little over 1,300 residences in Cheyenne that are considered contributing structures.
1,300.
Okay.
So theoretically, there could be a large number of homes every year that would qualify for remediation under this program.
Yeah, Mr. Councilman, through you, Chair, to Councilman Seagrave. Certainly only those that have been allowed to fall into this state of disrepair, where they either become a public safety hazard or they have they've compromised the ability of that structure to retain its integrity.
Well, that's one of my other questions, Mr. Chair, through you.
Yep.
The people that are allowed to file a petition, the people that think that there is an issue with these buildings, under paragraph E 2A, it says petitions charging that a structure is a neglected structure shall be filed with the director. And charge a reasonable fee to cover costs associated with investigating, processing, and researching regarding the petition. And then in paragraph C, any official, commission, or department of the city, any state agency, or any local or state historical preservation or business association may request in writing that the board make a preliminary investigation
So if I own a historical structure, any of these agencies can request that I be investigated. And you're gonna charge me a fee to do that investigation? Is that how I'm reading this?
Mr. Chairman, I had a follow-up question on that paragraph and.
Go
it is-
ahead. It's germane to the
It is in
conversation.
regard to the fee, so I want an explanation of that. I didn't want to ask my question twice. Is the fee charged to the petitioner or the landowner? And that was my question, so that's kind of a tag along to Councilman Seagrave's question.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Councilman Rennie, yes, this is an attempt to recompense the city for any expenses that it has to incur. So yeah, this would be charged to the petitioner.
So you don't get frivolous charges that way, ideally.
Exactly, and in answer to Councilman Seagrave through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, that provision does indicate that these entities are able to be petitioners and make a petition or make a claim that there has been an instance of demolition by neglect.
Mr. Chair, I guess I just have trouble with any official, commission, or any department in the city, or any state agency, or any local or state historical preservation or business association. I mean, that's a pretty broad swath of people that can file a petition. I don't know any other ordinance out there that the city operates that would allow that broad of group to file a complaint against a property owner. Just any comments on that?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Councilman Seagrave, what they're allowed to do by that section C is request that our board make an investigation into whether or not that there's a situation, of demolition by neglect. They may or may not prevail. They may, an association as defined there, may ask us to investigate it, and the board may find that there's no cause or no finding that any demolition by neglect exists.
Mr. Chair, through you.
Go ahead.
Under paragraph K, enforcement provisions, so paragraph 3, enforcement, if the owner refuses or fails to commence, diligently pursue and complete the necessary repairs within the time period as specified in the final notice or final order, the city is hereby authorized to have performed and to complete the necessary remedial work to prevent further deterioration and to defray the cost thereof as provided herein. To me, that sounds like the city is going to be doing the work. You indicated the city has no obligation to do that, but the city is hereby authorized to have performed and to complete the necessary remedial work.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Councilman Seagrave, I believe that provides the city with the authority to make those repairs should it have the needs, and it does not compel the city to do something it can't afford to do in my reading, in my interpretation of that section.
Mr. Chair, through you, paragraph 4, we're giving employees, agents, and representatives are hereby expressly authorized to enter upon private property. You're not entering upon my private property. I can tell you that. And I'm not going to authorize. Let me read it again. Authorized assistants, employees, agents, or other representatives. I don't feel like I have the authority to authorize those folks to enter upon anybody's private property.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Councilman Seagrave, the expenditures for repair work, and that would only be in an instance where the city said has the desire or votes that it feels like it has the means and the desire to conduct these repairs. If in such a circumstance where the city expresses its will to do that, this portion of the provision would say that, the people, you're hiring to do the repair work would need to have access to the building to do it.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Seagrave.
this seems awfully broad and overreaching. I don't feel like as a city council person, I want to extend authority to lots of different people. To enter onto private property. I don't feel good about the city upfronting costs to repair structures, attaching liens to homes. I just feel like this is overly broad, overreaching. I mean, my goodness, we're having a rebellion right now over 10-cent plastic bags. Wait till folks get a hold of this. In comparison, this is much more onerous. So I will be a no voter. Thank you. I appreciate the committee's work, but I just don't think this is something that residents of Cheyenne are interested in supporting. At least not that I've heard of. Thank you.
Well, the light's on, so we'll go ahead and go with Dr. Rennie next with his questions.
Mr. Chairman, I guess my question, perhaps Charles or even Mr. White may be able to answer. Do city inspectors, I presume, have the ability to enter a property, like at least when they're doing construction evaluations or whatever? Do we already have that authority?
Chair, members of the committee, Charles Bloom, Planning Development Director. When it comes to a building permit, yes, the authority does exist, provided there's an active building permit. When it comes to nuisances and health, I'm not 100% certain on that as regard to the existing building code. When it comes to just general zoning investigations, the Planning and Development Director or their designee is authorized to be on private property for the purposes of an investigation of a potential zoning violation. They're restricted from entering into single family homes. I believe that was the most recent amendment that was made with the enforcement modifications. The one disconnect between this amendment and my authority to seek out a zoning violation is there in two different chapters or two different elements of municipal code. Unified Development Code is its own independent standalone ordinance, where this is in our general Cheyenne Municipal Code. So the authorizations that I would have under Unified Development Code would not apply in this specific case.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So I hadn't thought of that, but bringing this up, would this work better if it were integrated into the UDC and the appropriate areas, or are you comfortable leaving it as it is?
Yes.
Chair, Councilman Member Rennie, it's either here nor there. With the appropriate cross-reference, it could be made. It is beneficial to have all of the historic preservation processes and procedures in the same portion of municipal code, which I think is a good place for it. If we're to bring it into Unified Development Code, there would be a lot of tweaks and a lot of changes that would have to be made to that document. So I stand that I'm more comfortable with them being separate, provided the appropriate authorizations are included in this element of the municipal code change.
Mr. Chairman, thank you to our director. Right now, more questions from Mr. Simpson, if I could.
Mr. Simpson.
Yes, sir.
So under K3 and 4, to follow up again somewhat with my colleague from Ward 2, where you have expenditures of repair work and enforcement, if this were to be adopted and the repair work is authorized, is the repair work, has this been something that, because earlier on in the ordinance you talked about sitting down with the landowner and coming up with an agreed upon plan. So is this only kick in if they refuse to do the plan, and or if they just refuse to talk to you, how how does K3 and K4 relate to a situation like that?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, through you to Councilman Rennie, I'll attempt to kind of make that connection. So the onus is on the property owner to exercise this economic hardship portion of the ordinance. They're informed of the availability of that. They're given a certain period of time to make that claim. And then they come forth and we try to work with them on some kind of a plan to address it, which can also include a decision to relax the effective portions of this. In item 4.3, the plan could include changes in building code modifications, relaxation of the provisions of this section, sufficient to mitigate the undue economic hardship. So it even provides an opportunity for the board to come back to the governing body and say, in this instance, special instance, we'd like to relax the provisions of this ordinance and not proceed to the enforcement part of it. Whether the board would choose to do that in a specific circumstance, I don't know, but it provides that opportunity. So yeah, the plan is supposed to be one that mitigates the need for this to get to the point where the enforcement provisions apply.
Mr. Chairman, then again, going back to if the owner refuses, then and the city or their agents enter the property to do the repair work. The repair work is that is only what was discussed in the plan early on. I mean, they can't go in there and just say, well, this needs done, this needs done, and oh, by the way, we got to do that.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Councilman Rennie, that is a reasonable assumption. The circumstances that result in the disrepair, those specific circumstances are the ones that apply in this ordinance. It wouldn't be a situation where this ordinance would authorize, under the provisions of this ordinance, some unforeseen repair issue to come to fore while the city is repairing it. It's those that have been made in the claim or the petition. That is the criteria that we'll examine. If a petitioner comes and says, these are the reasons that we think that there is an instance of this ordinance, those are the ones we'll be looking at.
Mr. Chairman, since it's brought up, going back to 4A, first of all, the reference was to Romanet 3. As I read that, as Mr. Simpson's description of this was that it was only changes, modifications to this ordinance and not all, because of the sentence reads changes in building code modifications, zoning regulations or relaxations. So I take that as blanket. The board under 4A Romanet 3 could relax requirements of any building code regulation. Is that what your intent was?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Councilman Rennie. Well, everything in this is in the context of something that really does not have teeth. It's a plan. And if the plan is asking the city to consider modifications to building code, then that's in the plan. Whether or not that would ever be something you would choose to do, it doesn't give this plan any authority to do anything. But it does say, here's something, hopefully it's a reasonable plan. And it takes into account the ordinances as they exist and would come forward and make a reasonable request to the city to execute the plan. But that the plan doesn't have any teeth, if I can use that expression, on its own.
Well, it does, in that there are penalties for violating a city ordinance. Following up on that, and Mr. Simpson, pardon me, because I'm going to jump away from you for a moment, but perhaps our attorney or Mr. Brody who's online or Mr. Bloom wants to address this. My perception is that this is city ordinance. The references to building codes are city ordinance. And we really don't have or zoning regulations. Those are all city ordinance. So we really don't have the ability to relax them in any situation. I mean, it's law, and our attorney is shaking, nodding in agreement, so if that's fine. So in some respects, 4A3 Romanet 3 is probably something we cannot do unless we change that to be, well, even we can't relax provision of this ordinance if it's an ordinance. And lastly, I guess my last comment is, and it's like, we both want to address that, but under 4A Romanet 1 and 2, I presume 4A1 was where you referred to someday you hope that the HP board would have a slush fund to address this. There have been homes, residences, buildings around town that we wanted to condemn and abate. And in some instances, I think we only had like $10,000 that we had budgeted for that. And there are buildings we haven't torn down or haven't gone after because our assumption is that, well, not the reality is we don't necessarily have the money to pay for the abatement. And secondly, the assumption is the likelihood of us recovering it is pretty slim. So, I mean, that's the reality of the situation, and I would hope that the board would understand that although 4A Romanet 1 and 2 sound good, the likelihood of being employed is pretty slim.
Understood, thank you.
You asked for staff, so I'm gonna go ahead and see what Mr. Bloom has to say.
The chair through the councilman, Renee, Charles Bloom, planning development director. Regarding the ability to weaken or waive different aspects of the code, the way that would be interpreted is it would allow staff to guide a person to the appropriate relief process, whether that be through a zoning application of sorts, whether like a site plan or a building code application, where they would be guided to the appropriate relief, whether it be a variance, administrative adjustment, or some type of adjustment or exception that's allowed under the building code. It wouldn't just be approval to ignore or not go through those requisite processes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that answer.
Mr. Laybourne, you and I are the only ones that haven't asked any questions on this particular one yet. I just give you the opportunity if you have some questions you'd like to ask of Ms. Tabor or Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did meet with Mr. Simpson earlier today.
Yeah.
And
you still deserve the opportunity to ask, though.
Yes, I understand. And I'm concerned that we're now at third reading with many questions in my mind and understanding of how this might happen. So all I can say is I appreciate the time the board's put in on this and Mr. Simpson's time. And I'll be making further comment. We have a motion on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your time. Thank you for being here. We really do appreciate that very much. We wanted to make sure to have this dialogue. So thank you for making the time to be here. Further public comment.
Mr. White wanted to say something, but he had to grab a copy of the International Property Code.
Well, that was, yeah, that question too. Isn't a lot of this covered under the international codes we've adopted? Sorry, isn't a lot of this covered under the international codes we've adopted?
I'm not in the business of waiting for members of the public for. If you'd like to go ahead, Mr. White, I really don't want to hold up the meeting. I wasn't sure how long it was going to take.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, Michael White, I'd like to alleviate what Mr. Seagrave said. This is an ordinance that's overbearing, but I apologize. I have to get a copy of the International Property Maintenance Code. That's the document that is enforcement. If you go with what the Historical Preservation Board does, you'd have to redo this whole document. So I would suggest used to work for the city. There are procedures basically with landowners. One is the notification, and I think you guys can relate to, even though it was a historical building, the time the council took the time with the issue post. That's the procedure that actually went through the International Property Maintenance Code. So thank you for your patience, but I would vote this down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. Any further public comment from here within the room?
Chair, members of the
I'd
committee.
like to give the opportunity, Mr. Bloom, if that's okay for anyone else who has not had the opportunity to speak yet. Go ahead, Mr. Bloom. I'd like to hear what you and Mr. Simpson have to say. I just wanted to make sure that we're letting folks have the opportunity.
And Chair, members of the committee, Charles Bloom, Planning Development Director. I just wanted to real quickly clarify the relationship between this and the International Property Maintenance Code. Yes, the IPMC is a tool that is used to stabilize and prevent essentially demolition or neglect of a building. It's very inclusive. It has a lot of situations, whether it be roof, paint, gutters, all of that. The one big difference between this proposed amendment and the International Property Maintenance Code is it does not, the IPMC does not address historic preservation. So in the event someone is not properly maintaining a window, when historic preservation may say the windows are a specific contributing feature of the property maintenance code, could compel an individual to replace that with something that would not be historically appropriate. So that is the difference between those two types of documents, but they do work hand in hand. There are different avenues, but it's what you would get in the end. That could be a result.
Thank you. Mr. Simpson, would you like to elaborate on that?
Just briefly, Mr. Chair, we've discussed a lot of technical details, but I feel I would be remiss if I didn't tell the full part of the story, which is why? Why did we work on this? Why did we bring it? Why is this important to your appointed Historic Preservation Board that we would want this to come forward? And the reason is that we feel that the city of Cheyenne is the most significant Western outpost in Western history. Its history is of mythical proportions. It's a huge part of what we sell and what our economy is based on, our source of civic pride, and the reason that this city is a great city to live in. And it just seemed to us that a city that would not make some kind of a measure to try to ensure that its history is preserved would not be doing our due diligence in this particular city, as significant as it is in the history of the West. So that's kind of the emotion behind why we have been working on this and bringing it for your consideration. Thank you.
I appreciate those comments. Thank you very much, Mr. Simpson. I don't believe we have any more public comment here within the room, but Madam Clerk, do we have any answers?
I don't think
We're still on questions.
I'm sorry, Dr.
So I think we're still on questions. We really haven't had a motion yet.
we don't.
Right, I'm just, you know what, the chair would entertain.
I have one last question.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. So has the Board of Realtors reviewed this and discussed this?
You want to come up?
Chair Kathy Tabor with the Cheyenne Historic Preservation Board. Chair, through you to Mr. Laybourne. Yes, I've been at the Cheyenne Board of Realtors meetings multiple times, presented the ordinance, not only the final version that's came here, but also the previous versions to get their opinion. I didn't have any comment from them the last time, and they've actually had this for probably 2 months, 3 months.
A while.
Yeah, it's been quite a while.
Thank you.
Sorry, just to elaborate on that, I can verify. We see each other at those meetings, so I can verify that they've had that information, and I can also verify that no comments were made at the last meeting. So they did have, I believe this was the final version that's in front of us, right? That's what they saw. Yeah. I just wanted to verify that was the case. All right. The chair would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve.
Moved by Dr. Rennie. Do
Can't
we,
discuss it if you don't second.
do we have a second?
I understand.
Do we have a second?
For the purpose of discussion, I second it.
Moved by Dr. Rennie, seconded by, Mr. Laybourne. Mr. Laybourne, you mentioned having some comments or wanting the opportunity, so, I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is something that is very important to me, certainly as a representative of Ward 1. I believe that all historic districts in the city are in Ward 1. And I'm familiar with the issues that have been raised here and how this goes back many years to issues that I was very involved in around the hospital, the historic governor's mansion, the issues of contributing structures. I'm an owner of contributing structures in the historic districts. And I believe that it's very important that we do what we can. And I also want to point out that having been involved for many years with issues surrounding this and the different historic preservation boards that have existed in the past, I think that it's clear that the board that we have now is very diligent and has accomplished some things that are very meaningful, like the historic fountain at the airport, at the recent action that stopped a demolition that was not authorized at 18th and Evans. So I definitely feel that this is a sincere effort by people who care about our community and who I've studied and been involved in all this. I would say that I have more to learn about this and how it intersects with other city law. And I do have some concerns about how this, the penalty and remedies, as well as the economic hardship questions, can possibly be reasonably answered. So I'm going to be looking at what Mr. Simpson suggested to me, that both Laramie and Jackson in the state of Wyoming have something similar to this. But I do want to express my concern here about a appointed board having this kind of authority, and about what could be considered to be demolition by neglect, particularly in the district in South Cheyenne. I think that that could really be a difficult question in a lot of the structures that I'm familiar with through my long involvement in abandoned buildings and the necessity we have to remediate those type of issues. So I look forward to continuing to study this matter, but I do want to express that I am concerned about the ultimate result here and how it could play out. Thank you.
Further comments from the committee? Seeing and hearing none, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
No.
This motion, this recommendation for next Monday's city council meeting will be for approval of this ordinance on third reading. Next item, please.
Number 11, ordinance second reading, amending the official zoning map of the city of Cheyenne, changing the zoning classifications from Frontier Mall PUD Planned Unit Development Ordinance Number 3132 to CB Community Business for land located at Lot 7B, Block 1, Frontier Mall.
Mr. Lloyd.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Seth Lloyd. I'm with the City of Cheyenne Planning and Development Department. The request that is in front of you today is to zone a portion of the mall out of the mall's PUD and into the CB zone. The impetus behind this is the various way interplay between the PUD zone and our current UDC means that the PUD actually has a higher design standard than the CB zone, and also the parking regulations are quite different between the two. And the applicant's desire here is to put in a new restaurant. That new restaurant would prefer to use greater parking than would normally be allowed by the interplay of the PUD and the UDC, and also use design standards that are applicable to the CB zone as opposed to NUB zone. Those are the main issues that bring this forward. The property is next to CB zoning on multiple sides, and for the purposes of use, the zonings to the Frontier Mall and the target parcel are also zoned CB for the purposes of use. So we're not changing much in the way of allowed uses, but we are changing some of the design standards, and that's the purpose for the zone change. The Planning Commission heard this item and recommended approval of it, and staff also recommended approval of this item. I'm available for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Lloyd?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Dr. Reed.
Just, Mr. Lloyd, if you don't know off the top of your head, a follow-up email will suffice, but what are the design standards for CB, and how relaxed are they compared to the PUD?
Yes, Mr. Chair, through you, the PUD zone actually does not have design standards, but the UDC does. And the UDC states that if the PUD doesn't supersede the UDC applies. And the UDC says that PUD zoning has to use the design standards of 6.7. 6.7 requires a lot in terms of ground floor windows, and there's some other design elements as well that the CB zone does not require. And the CB zone uses the design standards of 6.9 in this case.
And Mr. Chairman, can Mr. Lloyd address the differences in parking requirements?
I can address, Mr. Chair, yes, I can address that as well. The parking requirements for the PUD have a very low minimum, and the UDC, when it was adopted, added a maximum that was a maximum percentage above the minimum. And because of the very low minimum on this location, the maximum was a threshold that this parcel bumped up against. They wanted to put more parking than the UDC's maximum combined with the PUD's minimum would allow. And therefore, in order to get that extra parking, the CB zone, by being straight CB zone instead of the PUD zone, it bumps the parking back into normal UDC code, which is normal for a restaurant. They're actually providing less than they're providing less than a restaurant might typically want in the zone district, because they are next to the mall, they can share parking at the mall, that sort of thing. So help explain both those issues better.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions from the committee for Mr. Lloyd? Thank you. Is there a developer's report? Mr. Hanson.
Good afternoon, Shane Hanson. Style Surveying Services, agent for the applicant. Biggie's Barbecue is purchased an outlot, lot 7B from the mall property. Replat was done to create this lot. This plat will be recorded after closing on the property. They're planning on building on the lot and moving out of the mall. They wish to change the zoning from the old PUD to CB. CB is the preferred zone to the city staff. Have any questions? I'll take those from you.
Questions from the committee for Mr. Hanson? Thank you. Further public comment from here in the room? Hearing none. Do we have any hands raised, Madam Clerk?
Don't see any.
We do not.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. Seeing that we have no more public comment, the chair would entertain a motion.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Laybourne and seconded by Mr. Seagrave. Further questions, comments from the committee? Go ahead, Dr. Reed.
It's nice it's not another bank, coffee shop, or tire center.
It is. It is. All right. That one has been building up for a while, I can tell. You really did to get that one off your chest. We have. Anything further from the committee? Okay. We have motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? The recommendation of this ordinance on second reading is for approval. Last item, please.
Number 12, ordinance second reading pursuant to section 2.2.2 plan development, regulating plan or development master plan, and section 5.6.2 PUD plan unit development district of the Unified Development Code, amending ordinance number 4286 by modifying certain standards of the adopted district planned unit development PUD for Sweetgrass, located southeast of the intersection of College Drive and Avenue C.
Mr. White, go ahead, sir.
Chair, for the record, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. The application before you is a PUD amendment to the entire Sweetgrass PUD. This PUD amendment does look at basically changing the layout of the PUD, does have some text changes, and then also changing the map for their master plan for the subdivision as a whole. So one of the notable things that is changing, especially with the map, is the road network. So the proposed road network that we may see as this development grows has changed, adding different legs in there, different connections. Overall is a much better road network than what was originally proposed. The map also looks at kind of redefining some of the areas based on what Sweetgrass would like for their proposed uses. So putting out just more areas that are medium density residential within there to low density to an additional use that was added for workforce housing. So you'll see those workforce housing areas towards the southern end of the map. Also within the amendment, they have taken out some text that was, there's a lot of things in there that could be taken out and kind of reduced. They looked at changing or adding some additional uses allowed in different areas. And then kind of also creating another map to show kind of their build out, which I do have up on the screen as well, for their different plan phases. I believe, and I'll let the applicant speak to this, but I believe the initial plan phases was around 23-ish, something like that, and it's gone up to about 30 phases now. So it is a longer build out. They have shifted things, so even back on, I'll go back to the other map. Certain things that have switched, the school district areas for schools out there has shifted more towards the east. The golf course is still planned for, that has shifted as well from where it was originally planned. And then you still have all that, a majority of the commercial up there by College and East Murray Road. Staff is working with the applicant on some corrections that still need to be made to the PUD. So the one that you do have before you is kind of being worked on still between staff and the applicant. So we would, as long as this moves forward, we would have a proposed substitute most likely at the next committee meeting. Because at Planning Commission, there was the recommendation of approval by the Planning Commission.
with staff's recommended conditions that the applicant work with staff on some corrections that still need to be made throughout the PUD. With that, staff does recommend approval of this to continue moving forward. If we do need to postpone it at the next committee meeting, because we still need to work with the applicant, we would bring that up at that next committee meeting, but staff believes that the applicant can have those corrections to us in time to have a substitute at the next committee meeting. I am available for any questions.
Questions from the committee for Mr. White?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Seagrave, go ahead.
Thank you for bringing this forward. It's very complicated. There's lots of changes. I don't when I read it, I get the feeling that we are diluting the project. I guess that's the best word I can come up with at this time. It seems like we're watering it down. It's not the same quality of project that was originally approved by the city. Is that a fair assumption? It's hard to tell as you read your way through it.
Chair, through you. I don't believe so. It is taking out some of the language that wasn't as enforceable by staff. A lot of the things that have been taken out they're more almost like covenant based or HOA responsibility rather than something that staff can enforce. There have been discussions with the applicant. So one example I would have is when it comes to holiday lighting. That's something that's very challenging for the city to enforce. If the HOA had something in the covenants, that's a different story. But certain things like that have been pulled out, but otherwise, a lot of the original text is still there. There have been some things that have been taken out, and then there have been things added. But it is still, with this PUD, it is still very different than what the UEC has required, requirement wise, and it is its own, basically its own subdivision in that sense. So I don't believe that it is watering down the project. They are making a lot of these modifications, and the applicant can probably speak to it better, based on how the subdivision has begun to develop out there and what they're seeing when it comes to the development of it. So they're making a lot of these changes based on what they are currently seeing with the current development that is out there.
Mr. Chair, one follow-up.
Go ahead.
I guess the feeling that I'm getting is, we're realigning garages and, for example, all driveways should be paved with impervious surfaces, including asphalt. I don't know. It just as I read through it, I didn't feel like this was getting better.
Mr. Chair, through you. So with the driveways, because you did bring that up, that section actually hasn't.
One example.
Yeah, that section actually hasn't changed. That was in the original PUD.
It's in red
For the, is it for the asphalt portion? Okay.
Page 11, paragraph D or 9D.
Maybe Casey can address that.
But that was just one example that I came across. I'm like, why would we be doing that?
Oh, okay. I do see what you're saying. So with that added in there, they're basically adding that as a clarification. Is what staff would review that as, is it's more of a clarification in there because it used to say just all driveways shall be paved. So that being added in is more of just clarifying what it should be paved with. I should note that with anything that goes through Sweetgrass, they have a design committee as well, that basically has to review every building permit or anything that really comes before it comes to the planning and development department. They do have a design committee that will review everything to make sure that it is going in the direction that the design committee wants Sweetgrass to go in.
Thank you.
Further questions from the committee for Mr. White? Is there a developer's report? Thank you, Mr. White.
Good afternoon, Chairman, and members of the committee. Casey Palma from the land planning for the owner. I think Connor covered it pretty well in terms of the question from the committee. I would agree with Connor that there aren't really any substantive changes to the PUD. It's really just about realigning everything with the MPO's master plan for the road network, the school district's desire to move the parcels, how things have developed in the meantime, and then what adjacencies are most appropriate. The only place where maybe you could consider the regulation diluted is that we've added a zone district called the Workforce Housing District. And that's just sort of an attempt to try to bring some more affordable homes into Sweetgrass. So as you all know, the cost of housing has been skyrocketing. The builders submitting stuff to the design review committee. I mean, they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel to get a $400,000 single family home on the market. And so what we've done with that workforce area down there by Bison Business Park and that commercial down there at the intersection of High Plains and what will be Level Trail is to just and we're very careful about how it fit into Sweetgrass and where it would be most appropriate to try to bring some housing on the market in those, in the 300,000 range as opposed to the 400,000 range. Sweetgrass is about 40% open space, which obviously when you're competing with developers that are providing 10 to 15% open space, that's a challenge. But it's integral to the vision of Sweetgrass and what was intended to be built out here over time. There's approximately 8 miles of planned greenway trails and approximately 12 miles of private trails that are planned to be built. Obviously, that's an amenity you don't find anywhere else in the state. And so in terms of the quality of the environment, we've really tried very hard to make sure that all of that is being maintained. As Mr. White mentioned, there's a design review committee, so no building permit or site plans can be approved by the city without that letter of endorsement. Typically, we'll see 1 or 2 rounds of review on those, so the builder will submit their materials to the design review committee. And there's usually a couple things that they've either missed or that we need to see more detail on before the committee can endorse it, and then it moves on to the city. So that being said, I think most of some of the red text, all the red text is basically what had been changed. The one that Councilman Seagrave brought up, actually the city engineer wanted some more specifics there and has provided additional language there just to make sure that they're comfortable with the driveways and the access aprons going on to residential properties. I don't think I have too much to add to what Mr. White said other than that. I've heard from about 20 landowners by email and phone. Some of them I've met in person and shared the documents. Otherwise, I've been emailing out both the phasing plan, the master plan, the text amendment to them. Everybody I've talked to, I haven't had one person have any concerns about the changes or any concerns about what's in the PUD or how it's being approached. So with that, I'd be happy to address these questions.
Any questions, comments for Mr. Palma?
What? How did you
I don't
make it
know.
turn blue?
Didn't make it.
I like that.
Yeah, well, it's part of a conspiracy.
Well,
It's
we're
part of the conspiracy against me today, I
used-
think.
we're used to
You're
green,
good.
so.
Go ahead, Mr. Laybourne.
Thank you. Mr. Palma, so I assume that you and I could sit down and go over this at some future date. There's a lot to absorb and a lot to remember. So maybe we can make arrangements to do that sometime later this week.
Yeah, we can do that. And Chairman, through you to Councilman Laybourne, you have my number, so you certainly can reach out to me and let me know when you're available to do that. I would note that, as Mr. White mentioned, we're just finishing up addressing all of the city comments and anything that needed to come up in this, finalized version. The 2 biggest things I think for fencing and lighting, which obviously those are big things, all the time in the city code. So I think we should be able to submit those to the city by the end of the week. And once those are prepared, I think that'd be a good version to sit down and go over.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer.
Thank you.
Further questions from the committee for Mr. Palmer? Thank you. Further public comment from here in the room? About online? Madam Clerk?
I don't see any. No hands raised.
Okay. All right, seeing and hearing no public comment, the chair will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Moved by Dr. Rennie, do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Laybourne. Further questions or comments from the committee related to this ordinance on second reading? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The recommendation will be for approval of this ordinance on second reading at next Monday's city council meeting. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.
So Charles texts me, you know, it's going into Diggy's space in the mall. Coffee shop.